Okay, well, can you hear me? Yes? No? Can you hear me better?
Yes, yes.
Okay, so first of all, good morning everyone. And of course, I'd like to thank also the organizers for inviting me to come to Shanghai. Actually, it's the first time for me, and I'm enjoying the conference very much. So I'm going to tell you actually mainly about this result about quantum cryptography with leaky sources, and I will tell you in a minute what does it mean. And later, as a second part, but very briefly, the last minutes, I will also discuss about other results that probably is also interesting in this community and in this topic of device independence and quantum cryptography. So let me say that this work was done together with TYQI2016 from NTT and with Marco Luca Marini, that is here in the audience from Toshiba. So of course, we're talking about quantum key distribution, and the main figure of merit is security, given that we don't have Vadim Makarov around, of course. And we try to really guarantee that the devices that we make are really secure. And to really guarantee this, we use two main tools. One is the laws of quantum mechanics, and the second, as already pointed out in the previous talk, is that we need some model for our devices. So we need to have some modeling of the devices together with quantum mechanics to really use later on some technical tools to prove that something is secure. And of course, anytime we just pass an imperfection and we don't consider an imperfection, it can open a side channel that could be exploited by it. And we have seen this recently in many different attacks, and in the previous talk, other alternative one has been mentioned. So I'm trying to give a more optimistic perspective. So to see how can we do to bridge this gap between theory and practice. And right now I see two main options. The first one is full device independence. Of course, there are also some assumptions, I agree about that. But one main problem is that the performance so far is not very promising. The second alternative might be to use measurement device independence. This is with this idea, at least, you can already remove one main problem of your system, that is the measurement unit. So you are completely robust against any detector side channel attack. This is a good start. And then you have to just focus on the transmitters. So you have to be sure that you know what are the quantum states you are transmitting, that your systems are well isolated and they are well characterized, but give us some hope. So of course there is still a lot of work to be done in that direction, but at least now we can focus on the transmitters. And we know, as I said, we have to take into account many imperfections that can be there about whether the states have been truly phase randomized, or they are really perfect for states, or they deviate a little bit, or we have some intensity fluctuations, and other imperfections. And so far, recently we have developed many techniques that help us to deal with these kind of imperfections. And so that, in principle, it seems that the performance do not suffer too much. So which means that even if we don't prepare perfect BBT for states, so we have a lot of errors in our system, in our transmitter, in principle, we can achieve really high performance. So there is also another assumption that is implicitly there, and that so far people didn't pay too much attention to it. And this assumption is that typically we consider that our devices are well isolated from if they are perfectly sealed. And this is, with the previous talk, we also saw some examples where we try to break on these private spaces. So how can we do to analyze this case? Because in reality, we will always have our devices will never be completely sealed from it. So even for instance, we have always some passive information that is going out of the devices. For instance, power consumption, maybe depending on the power consumption of your device, there is some information about which settings you have been using each given time, or just electromagnetic radiation for the devices, or if can try this kind of attacks that mentioned previously, where C makes a Trojan horse attack, C shines some light inside the devices and waits from reflections. So in reality, our devices will never be isolated. And we have to consider this information that can go out in our security tools. And this is going to be the main point of this talk, to give you some ideas how this can be done. So, in principle, we will really face a situation where we have our devices and there will be some information leakage that goes out. This could be passive, as I said, because of maybe power consumption or electromagnetic radiation, or it could be an active leak, with just shining light inside. And then, we have recently developed a general formulas to deal with any kind of information leakage, both from the intensity modulators or phase modulators, so whenever you use the TYQI states or you select your BBT4 information. But here I'm going to present just a very simple example. That is the case of the TYQI state with leaky sources. So in principle, we have the formulas to analyze, I believe, almost any scenario. So and let me start with the case of the perfectly sealed source. In this case, everything is quite easy because in theory we have that Alice emits Fock diagonal states, and then it just with different photon number distribution. And then we have mainly, when we want to estimate our quantities, we have this kind of linear equations where there are some observed quantities that we directly see in our experiment that are the gain and the Q bar. We know also the photon number distribution, and at the end we have some linear equations that relate some unknowns that are the yields and the error rates of our n photon pulses, and this we can estimate. And this is what allows us to achieve really good performance. And a key assumption here is, again, because the devices are perfectly isolated, is that the yields and error rates are independent of the intensity setting, which means that, of course, Alice and Bob, every time they select an intensity setting, there is no information about this selection that goes to Eve. So these yields and these error rates are independent. Now, if we move to a realistic scenario where there is some information leakage, of course, Alice still prepares the same kind of states, this kind of Fock diagonal states. But now, we're assuming that, of course, there will be always some small, and later on we will quantify what I mean by small, information that can go out of the devices. Which means that Eve can know partially, maybe what intensity setting has been selected at each given time. Of course, in reality, this is what is going to happen. And then, when we do the analysis, the situation changes. Because now we cannot say anymore that the yields and the error rates are independent of the intensity setting. Now they will depend on the intensity setting. And of course, we have the same kind of equations as before, but now we have this kind of dependence. And if we want to prove security, the hope is that we could derive a kind of relation of this form. And what does it mean? This means that at the end of the day, again, we will be interested to estimate some particular yields and some particular error rates, for instance, associated with some signal intensity, some particular quantities. And what we hope is that since now the yields and error rates will be different, can differ from each other, that at least we can make them that they are close to each other so that they don't differ too much. So that the yields, let's say, of any possible intensity setting are just related with the one of, say, the signal plus some fluctuation term. And if we can bound these fluctuations, then again, we can use the code. So the point is, how can we do this? And this is going to be in the next slide, and maybe it's the most important one of the talk. The idea is simple. We need, of course, I will come to this later. In principle, we need a model. We need to know what kind of states, or how, more than the states that go out, we need to know how our devices work. But I will come to this in a moment. So suppose, for now, that we know that some output states go out of the system. And this output state, this rho n gamma I, means whenever Alice sends an n photon pulse, then this is the joint state of Alice and Bob, which includes also this information leakage, who could be there. So in general, we expect to be a kind of tensor product. So when Alice sends an n photon pulse, just really n photons goes out, together with another quantum state that brings this additional information about the intensity setting. But in general, might not be a tensor product. And then we want to know, based on these states that Eve has at her disposal, how much can the yields differ from each other? How different they can be? And this can be nicely related with the trace distance, because the trace distance actually tells us that whenever a measurement we make in some quantum state, the maximum that the probability distributions can differ is just related with the trace distance of the quantum states. And this is a tight bound, which means that actually if can always achieve this bound. So it really relates us how much our probability distribution can differ based on the quantum states if observed. So taking into account that in the TYQI state, we're just interested in detection probabilities, which means to obtain a click or not, we can really immediately particularize this general statement to the case of the TYQI state that basically relates us the conditional probabilities of getting a click on both sides depending on the conditional states, which again can be upper bound by the trace distance, or put it in another way. So maybe this is a bit technical right now, but the key point is that we can quantify how much the yields could differ from each other in reality when there is information leakage based on this trace distance between the quantum states. And this is basically everything we need. So, and again, this is a tight bound. If can always achieve this. So, once we have this starting point, so how much the yields can differ, and also the same, one can do the same for the error rates, one can apply again the TYQI state. So just as an example, suppose that we have the TYQI state with 3 settings, gamma S, gamma B, and gamma W, and using just for simplicity the first set of equations, we have 9 possible combinations. We can play with them, and again, find what we wanted. That means we can relate the yields of the different TYQIs with the yields of the signal, plus some deviation terms, which we can bound. So the only question that is missing is how to bound this information, how to bound how much these fluctuation terms can fluctuate or change. And for this is, I must admit, not an easy question. So what one needs is to know, to characterize really your device. So you really need to know how your intensity modulators or your phase modulators are working. And of course, you have to characterize this even against attacks like the ones Paddy mentioned, where it can actually try to destroy your device. So if you are able to characterize how your devices really work, even in the worst case scenario, or just to put some conditions of how they operate, then based on this information, you can immediately bound the information that can go out of your device, and once you know the information that can go out of your device, you can immediately use this kind of security proof. So just to illustrate it with an example, since we don't have this kind of model of the intensity modulators, we just consider 3 possible examples and apply this general formalism to them. In the first one, we assume that if shines light into the intensity modulator that selects the TYQI state, and some coherent states go out, where the amplitude is fixed for all the possible coherent states, but if has the freedom to change the phase. Of course, in reality, this is maybe too optimistic for if, because probably the intensity modulator doesn't act in a way that, depending on the intensity selected by Alice and Bob, the output could be completely controlled by if its phase. But anyway, even if it is over-conservative, it's a scenario we consider. In the second scenario we consider is the scenario where if shines light, then it goes through the intensity modulator, at some point it gets reflected, and then the amplitudes are also attenuated in the same way as the signals. And still we give if the freedom to select the phase. And in the third scenario, we consider the case where the light goes in, at some point gets reflected, it gets attenuated as a signal, and then Alice uses an ideal phase randomizer that helps to prove the security. Of course, this is just an example to show more or less what is the best we can get. Because in reality, one has to be careful with this ideal phase randomizer, because if could also get some information, partial information about what we are doing. But anyway, for the moment, again, it's just an example. We assume that it's really a perfect phase randomizer. And now we can, for this example, we can just apply the theory as I mentioned. So we just have to calculate some coefficients. Now, if we have some model, we know how to do it. For instance, for the first case, we need to calculate the trace distance between these quantum states. This can be done very easily. And of course, for the other cases, one can do it as well. Then one can do the kind of equations that one does in the TYQI states. It's basically the same, where we have to estimate the same entities, but the only difference is that now you have some additional terms, that these are these fluctuation terms, and they, again, they can be bounded. So you know your bounds. And you can do the same to calculate the other parameters. So it's basically the same. So everything translates again in some additional terms that quantify your information leakage. And now let's evaluate it. For this, we just use the same TYQI formula as always. The difference is now, of course, we can maximize in the intensity that Alice can select, and we assume that the weakest decoy is fixed. But we also minimize over some degree of freedom if now have that is related with this information leakage. So we have to minimize over these kind of parameters. And to do the experiment, we just assume some particular experimental parameters to do the simulations and then typical channel model. And then the experimental parameters, it is some misalignments, and dark count, some efficiency of your device, of Bob's device, the detector's efficiency, the loss coefficient of the channel. So typical experimental parameters, and we just do our simulations. And again, for the three cases. In the first one, that is where we assume that if sign slide and the output states are computed in the state where if can select the phase, we see that the secondary rate, of course, it really depends on the output intensity of our signals. So this black line is for the perfect case that we have always considered, so which means our devices are perfectly isolated. And now the other colors, the other lines, are depending on how much output intensity can go out from our device. And we can see that, of course, if we put in principle optical isolators, sufficient optical isolators, then we can make this output intensity very low. In this case, 10 to the minus 12, 10 to the minus 13, we can reach already almost the asymptotic, or the ideal case. And of course, if you put less attenuation, you know that your secondary rate cannot go much longer. So this kind of formulas allows you to know, depending on your isolation, how much your devices are isolated, how much intensity can go out to quantify how far you can go. And for the other cases, well, the scenario is slightly better. Of course, here if has less degree because now the amplitudes are limited, so we can go a bit further with less attenuation. And the last one, a phase randomizer, is the best one. It really helps you to go almost to the ideal scenario with 10 to the minus 6 AV or 10 to the minus 7. So you don't need too much isolation. So it really motivates the fact that maybe one should consider in reality to put phase randomizers also there. So there are also two more lines that maybe I should mention. The first one is this dashed black line. This corresponds to GLLP, so which means that it tells us that in certain scenarios, if the amount of information leakage from our devices is too much, then maybe it does not pay off to do decoy state. It's better just to go without it. And then there are also some dashed lines here that you can see mainly in this plot. It's also because in our analysis we consider any kind of information leakage, not only from the decoy state, but also from the BBT4 settings. So in this case, for your phase modulation. So, but here I didn't present it. These are just the results. If you take into account both the intensity modulator and the phase modulator. So, and we can see that it's on the phase modulator, the information leakage from the BBT4 state starts to be more relevant in this scenario, while in the others, the attenuation is already so high that it really doesn't play too much role. And as I was saying, one of the motivations is to use it in TYQI. So we can do the same and one can get similar results. So which means we can again quantify, depending on how much information we assume is coming out of our devices, how much this information affects our security proof, and what is the maximum distance. Or put it in another way, we can quantify how much isolation we have to put in our devices to guarantee certain level of security. This is the data. And now, in the second part of the talk, this will be much quicker. I'm going to talk about another topic. So, and this second topic is what about detector device independence? Because I've been telling you that one possible way to go through and to guarantee the security of our implementations is to use measurement device independent QKD and to try to characterize your transmitters. And now, of course, take into account also this kind of leakage information. But MDA-QKD has two small drawbacks. The first one is that it is a bit more difficult to implement experimentally. Probably people here in the audience know that because there have been amazing experiments going on here in China about MDA-QKD. The last one above 400 kilometers, so really impressive. So, but it's a bit more difficult. And the second part is that you need, if you make the final key analysis, you need the size of your data, block sizes, should be slightly bigger or a bit bigger than what it is in a standard QKD. So, and to overcome these two main limitations, recently, or mainly last year, there have been 4 different proposals that basically have the same idea. And the same idea is just to change measurement device independent with detector device independence. And this detector device independent follows the same aim as measurement device independent, but now instead of making the well state measurement on the channel, we just move it to both. And if we move it to both, we just have some advantage. The first advantage is that now Bob doesn't need to have a laser or a transmitter. He just has a passive linear optics network, which means that now you don't have 2 photon interference from independent laser sources, so it's much easier to implement. So of course there are some slightly different assumptions here. Now this linear optics network that is before your well state measurement and after the channel, you have to trust it, and you have to be sure that there is no side channel information that goes out. So you have to trust it and to have it well characterized. Okay, of course this can be much more challenging than the measurement device independent because this is connecting to the channel and this has the door open. But let's assume for the moment that it's fine, that we have it that is trusted, that it is characterized. Okay? And as I said, now what does is, instead of measurement device independent, we use 2 degrees of freedom. Alice uses, for instance, polarization, and Bob uses path. And as I said, this kind of a scheme has a few advantages. You don't need 2 photon interference, and then you expect basically to have the same performance as a standard QKD. But it has one problem for the moment, is that people thought, yeah, we have the same kind of security MDA-QKD, but unfortunately we have not been able to prove it yet. So there have been some attempts, and people make some partial security proofs. In some particular scenarios, you can prove it's secure, but we never were able to prove that it's actually secure against detector side channel attacks. And probably the point is why we were not able to do it is because it is not secure. And this is what I wanted to mention in this. So, but just before coming to that, although we have just a couple of minutes, I just mentioned this is just an example of one of the implementations. As I said, there have been 4 independent works, and all of them are very, very similar. So you see again that you have Alice, have the source that is trusted and send it to a channel, and then comes this kind of linear optics network that plays with the signal to encode information in path. And then this shadow area is also trusted and characterized, and then comes to the detectors, and the detectors in principle are untrusted and uncharacterized. And then the point is, in this particular scheme, a click in one of the 4 detectors means a prediction in one well state. So again, it's, as I said, very similar to measurement device independent QKD. And again, these were the assumptions. And the first point, or the first suggestion that gave us the idea that probably is not exactly the same as MDA-QKD was even already this paper by Pinky from last year proved, look, if this is equivalent to measurement device independence, and you can take your detectors and you can just change them, modify them, and if you have access to detectors, and remove them and put a completely different measurement device there, because it's like a kind of black box, so you can completely change it, then you can play this game. This was already proven last year. And this gave already the impression, well, there are already more difference to MDA-QKD. But then the idea is, well, this is fine, it's good to know, but in reality, of course, you expect that maybe if cannot really change your detectors with a completely measurement device and put it there. So people think, let's assume that Bob builds the device himself. So he doesn't want to characterize the detectors to be sure that he doesn't have problems with blinding attacks and so on. But in principle, Eve was not able to completely change your device. So you build your apparatus to yourself, but then the detectors, you don't want to characterize them. And what they wanted to show here is that even in this scenario, you can break the TYQI2016. So I think I don't have the time to go through this. So I will just give you the main points. So I'm going to skip all this part. And just give you the first take-home message is what can rigorously prove is that detector device independent is not based on the same principles of measurement device independence. So measurement device independence, the security is based on post-selected entanglement, and we can prove that the detector device independent is not based on post-selected entanglement. And then we can show that actually it is unsecure against detector blinding attacks together with some additional imperfection of the detectors. So we have proposed different strawberry strategies. They are in this work. So some of the authors here, Siham, Anki, also Feihu, and Buddy are in the audience. So you can ask any of us later on after the talk if you are interested in more information. But anyway, we have proposed different strategies that either exploit imperfections of the detectors, which again, here you are assuming that they are uncharacterized, and we can break the TYQI2016, or even we can exploit other imperfections on the linear optics network. Even if we assume that it's trusted and characterized, this does not mean that it's going to be perfect. In reality, there will be always an imperfection, even if you know them. And you can also exploit them to break the system. And with this, I think it's time for me to finish. Basically, I went a bit quickly, but my main points were the first one. I just tried to show you that we have a general formality to deal with any kind of information leakage. So in reality, when we do an PQD setup, this kind of information has to be taken into account because any device will leak always some information outside to the channel and to Eve. And we have just presented a general formality and just particularized it to particular example just to show here. In this talk, that is the go-state PQD. And then in the second part, also quite quickly, I just wanted to point out that detector device independent is not secure against detector side channels. So we'll come back to the two previous solutions I mentioned, either to go through full device independence or to go through measurement device independent together with trying to make an effort to characterize to our transmitters. And then finally I have one last slide. This is because recently we got together with many groups in Europe and companies. There you have the list of partners, which includes TYQI2016, Telecom Paris Tech, Lenny I think is around, Toshiba, Marcus here, University of Düsseldorf, University of Geneva, University of Leeds, I think most of them may be here or will be in the evening, University of Padova, Paul is here, and University of Vigo. Myself, we got a European grant, and we have 15 openings for PhD students. They are very well paid, they have really fantastic conditions, and we are looking for really good candidates, and this will start in 2017, so next year. So if anyone is interested, please let us know. You can contact any of the partners here, or just if you know anyone who could be interested, please let him know about this advertisement, because we have these 15 positions in quantum cryptography. Thank you very much for the
I guess I'm still not quite sure of the point for the second part of the talk, that's the DDI QKD. By my understanding, in the protocol, you need the measurement party 4 to take different operations, say phase modulations, to the incoming states in different bases. I'm just wondering that in that case, the Eve may produce certain type of intelligent light. Say that light will behave something like this. If Bob take operation of this, then it causes this result. If Bob take another operation, then it takes another result. Then it seems something like, just like the normal QKD procedure with active measurement.
Yeah, indeed, this is our point. So we can show that TYQI2016 is nothing but the standard QKD. So in fact, it is unsecure against blinded detector blinding attacks. That is what you are saying. So basically, we can make that Bob only gets a click when he selects the same basis as if, or put it as you said, we can make that Bob gets a click if you can send Bob light such that he only gets a click when he selects a particular setting, that is the one if wants him to select. So this is what we have proven. So, and of course, there is some additional, let's say, technicality there, is that for the attack we just performed with the blinding, it happened that you produces double clicks. So the additional kind of eavesdropping strategies that we include there, that I didn't mention in detail, I just put them in the screen, are different ideas to avoid this double clicking. So that you can use detector blinding attacks together with these kind of strategies to really reproduce the expected results by Bob, and you completely break the scheme. So our point was just to say detector device independent has the same vulnerabilities against detector side channels as a standard QKD.
Thank you.
Okay, sorry. I have a question about the phase randomization. You mentioned that the question is how random is random? I mean, in experiment, because we are using the directly electrical modulated laser, and I think Toshiba also use this kind of laser. And is it random? Is the randomness enough? And also, if it's not enough, if we are doing the random modularization, how many random numbers do I need? I mean, to make the phase randomized.
Well, I think maybe this question would be better for Xiongfen. I mean, he has a result about precisely this point, but I can also reply if I'm wrong. Maybe Xiongfen can correct me. So, in principle, if you use a pulse source, it should be random in math. Because we know now from Xiongfen's result and TYQI2016 that already a few bits, so something like 10 or 12 different settings should be more than enough. So that means that you really need not too much randomness there. So which means that you should be fine. However, our point of the randomizer there was for a different purpose. So it was not about, of course, in the core state you need to send phase randomized with copy impulses, and this is what's your question. But this randomizer was for a different purpose. The purpose is that if can shine light inside your device and gets the back reflected light. And the fact is that if can make an attack, well, she has some kind of entanglement. So she can have a system, an entanglement system, send part of the system to your device, and then measure the back reflected light with the other part that was here. And doing that, she has much more power, which means that you can really limit what if can do. If you are sure that the light that comes out of your device is phase randomized. So it means you put an additional phase randomizer there, such that even if shines light in, when it goes out, it is phase randomized. So it's just to prevent the Trojan horse attacks. It's an additional countermeasure that, as we saw in our system, if you go that way, then the advantage would be that you will need much less isolation. This is more or less the key point.
All right, if probably we can move the question to the coffee break, and then let's thank the Marcus again.